So thank you for logging on and clicking onto this video on folic acid. I hope this is about 15 minutes long. I'm aiming for that. You might need to pause the video now and again to think of the answer to a question, or to write something down, or to read an article. So the first thing is to remember the main function of folic acid. Think of the first two letters of folic acid being the same as the first two letters of fetus, because it's extremely important during pregnancy to prevent spina bifida and anencephaly. So log on to this article here on independent.ie, pause this video and read the article, about 3 minutes long, and then press play again. So when you've read the article, just remember the following questions I'm going to ask. It would be really good if you could pause and think before you look back onto the article to answer the question. This will facilitate your learning. And these questions are linked to the main things you need to know, but they're a little bit extra. They're a little bit of background work to anticipate questions that you might have asked during class. So the first question is very easy. What do you think conception means? So pause to think. And a little tip is to say your answer out loud. What does conception mean? So conception is also known as fertilization. Now, what does NTD stand for? So as you might have guessed, an NTD means a neural tube defect. And these are defects of the brain, the spine, and the spinal cord. They happen in the first month of pregnancy, just in the first month, in the first week even, often before a woman even knows that she's pregnant. So how does an NTD occur during pregnancy? Well, neural tube defects are a group of birth defects. There's spina bifida, anencephaly, and there's another one that's much more rare. And these names refer to birth defects where the openings in the spine or the cranium up near the brain remain open from early in human development. So they don't close up, and amniotic fluid can get in and cause paralysis in the lower limbs of the body. And in the case of anencephaly, it results in death. So one of the physical characteristics of spina bifida is paralysis of the lower limbs, and you would need to know that. So why does anencephaly lead to death? Well, it's a fatal condition, and it's due to the brain not fully developing. The only thing you really need to know here is this word, anencephaly, learn how to spell it, and know that it's associated with, that it is an example of a neural tube defect, an NTD. So once you take folic acid before becoming pregnant, you can avoid up to 75% of, you reduce your chances of getting a neural tube defect by 75%. So the problem is many people, don't know that they're pregnant. So the advice is always to take folic acid supplements once you are really of childbearing age or sexually active. So in the study of that article that you just read, what percentage of pregnant women in the study took folic acid prior to conception? And as you read back or think back, you will remember that it was just 13.7%, a very low percentage of women took folic acid. And in the article, how is it suggested that the government can respond to the high incidence of NTDs in Ireland? So women who are trying to get pregnant are advised to take a 400 microgram folic acid tablet every day until they're 12 weeks pregnant. And it's also been suggested that, as well as taking a tablet, breads and cereals which lose folic acid through the processing of the bread and the cereals will be fortified with folic acid or folate. So also in the article, there was an indication as to why some households might be prevented from affording to buy green leafy vegetables. And you may or may not be familiar that the cost of vegetables, maybe like from farmers markets sometimes, and good quality grocers, can sometimes be quite high. And if there's a lot of mouths to feed, this poses financial challenges. What solution do you think there is to not being able to buy, say, fresh, dark green leafy vegetables all of the time? An answer to this question would be to buy frozen spinach, which is quite cheap and it's frozen when the vegetable is very fresh. So let's start, and we'll just take a little pause. So the next part of the lesson is really the nuts and bolts of what you actually need to learn. And you need to learn all of this that I'm showing up on the screen. So first of all, when we're talking about the two different types of folic acid, really we're talking about folates. And folates mean the natural form found in food, like in broccoli and offal, or folic acid, which is synthesized in a laboratory using certain bacteria. So when we talk about folates, we're talking about folic acid and folate in their two different forms. Next thing you need to know are the properties of folic acid. As you know, it's a B group vitamin, so it has to be water soluble. And by contrast, if it's water soluble, it tends to be insoluble in fat. So it's stable in an acidic environment, and in contrast to that, it's destroyed by alkalis. It's fairly heat stable, so there is some loss in cooking, but it won't be all lost in cooking. And it's very, very sensitive to light and to oxygen. So that needs to be, that has implications for food storage and for the freshness of food, especially. Next, we look at the sources of folic acid. Offal, this is in order of importance, by the way. So offal is the number one source, and examples of offal would be, well, you tell me. But you can't, because I can't hear you. So I'll tell you it's liver and kidney. And then we've got whole grain cereals. Again, you give me examples of what they are. And what I would have said would be wheat germ and bran and wholemeal bread. When we're talking about dark green leafy vegetables, we are of course talking about broccoli, spinach, kale, cabbage, and then there's just regular milk. Dietary supplements, the manufactured form of folic acid, and these are of course advisable for pregnant women or women who are planning to get pregnant. And then finally, fortified foods, mainly breakfast cereals and bread. We also have pulses. Pulses should be there, like dried beans, and some other surprising sources would be oranges and avocados. And often folic acid is manufactured in the gut. In fact, I should have written that in, so you can write that in as a note. It's manufactured in the gut. So for like children who drink a lot of milk, I don't think it's such a big issue as it is for women who are getting pregnant. Okay. Next, we have how much folic acid do you actually need? So this symbol here, and this funny looking U with the little tail coming out of the front of it, is the symbol for microgram. So that's a 1,000th of a milligram. So it would be 1,000 of 1,000 of a gram. So we're talking about minuscule, tiny, tiny amounts. But but they just have to be consumed. So for children, it's 100 to 200 micrograms. For you, adolescents, it'll be 300 micrograms. as you know, prior to conception, we're talking about 3 months prior to conception, you would need to have 400 micrograms. Then while one is pregnant, it would be 500. And then post-pregnancy, during lactation, which you might remember means breastfeeding, of course. So they're the RDAs. So how are you going to remember the functions of folic acid? Before we go into the functions, just remember that the functions are mainly to do with protein. The brain development, the spine development, DNA, RNA, and RBC, which means red blood cells. So this is how I remember it. If you think of fosters a line of spine and red blood cells, we have the spelling of folate. If you think of the spine being like a line and cells, C for cells. Okay, so for the functions of folic acid, you need to remember that nearly all of the functions relate in some way to protein. First of all, you need folic acid in your diet to break down protein, especially the proteins methionine, cysteine, serine, glycine, and histidine. What do these proteins all have in common? The answer is they are all essential amino acids. So you might want to double check that in your textbook, in your notes, under the heading of protein, in the protein section. Now also, folic acid is necessary to create something called the intrinsic factor, so that B12 can be absorbed correctly and produce the correct size of red blood cells. So if there's not enough folic acid, there's not enough intrinsic factor, which is a type of glycoprotein secreted by the mucosa in the stomach. And this is important in the absorption of vitamin B12. So without B12 and without enough B12 being absorbed, you're going to get a type of anemia called pernicious anemia, in which the cells are just, the red blood cells are too large and can't be used by the body. Number 3, we need folic acid to help create genetic material. So these complicated, complex molecules such as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid, require folic acid to be made. And they store our genetic material. Number 4, we need folic acid to help create the myelin sheath, which is around our nerves. And this myelin sheath is very important to protect nerves from electrical impulses. And also, when this is correctly structured, it speeds up the function of the nerves as well. So extremely important. We've already covered the formation of the brain and the spinal cord in the fetus, therefore preventing neural tube defects. And folic acid also has a role in maintaining a healthy immune system.